Hi everyone, I'm Nabil Hannan, Field CISO at NetSPI, and this is Agent of Influence.
So today we have with us Jeff Mann. Jeff, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and where you are professionally?
Sure. I've been in the InfoSec industry for over 40 years, so I'm considered an old-timer. I do several different things these days. My day job is I'm a consultant and advisor for a company called OBS Global, primarily do PCI security assessments. As a side gig, I do a podcast called Paul's Security Weekly. I'm one of the co-hosts. Been doing that for about 10 years. Because I am an old timer and because of my background, I do a lot of conference speaking and talking about the way things were and the way things should be and the way things could be. My background primarily is from the National Security Agency. I was there in the late 1900s, from about 86 to 96, which was sort of the beginning of the whole internet age, the transition away from industrial and mechanical things into doing things all digital and all things internet. So it was kind of a unique time. I had an opportunity to do some pretty unique things at that time.
So one of the things, being in the industry for so long, you've invented the Cryptologic wheel. Can you share a little bit about what inspired that creation, and more importantly, how did it impact the industry, and how has it been leveraged so far?
So when I started at the National Security Agency in the late 80s, I went to work for what was called the Manual Crypto System branch of the National Security Agency. We were responsible for putting out all the manual cipher systems, the things that we mostly read about in books these days, or sometimes there's variations of those things in various capture the flag exercises. Caesar ciphers, simple substitution, and so on and so forth. But there's this thing called a one-time pad, which was literally a pad of paper that had random characters printed on it, which was essentially the key. And a message that wanted to be transmitted would be written down by hand, letter by letter, and then using a simple algorithm based on what's called a visionaire table, which is think of a big square with A to Z across the top, A to Z down the side, and then the letters of the alphabet filled in at offsets. Magically, that produces unique three-letter combinations. So the plain text, the key, and then the cipher, and it works in reverse. One of my early customers, as it were, was U.S. Special Forces, and I was working with them. They used these one-time pads, and they would memorize these three-letter combinations that I didn't, and I was working with them to upgrade some of their communication systems. And as a sort of an aid to me, I came up with a cipher wheel that emulated that three-letter combination. Long story short is they saw what I was using, they liked it, so I found a way to get them produced. NSA in those days would supply all the cryptographic systems. So we had 15,000 of them made, and they were distributed to U.S. Special Forces. Over the years, I came to learn that they called it the whiz wheel. And as far as I can tell, they used it into the early 2000s until they started using like encrypted phones and things like that. Fast forward until about 2018, I ran into somebody at DEF CON. There was a retired Green Beret, used to use the wheel. He was very excited to meet me as the inventor and told me how valuable it was in the service to the defense of our country. And he got me an honorary lifetime membership in the Special Forces Association. It was a unique contribution. I got to speak at their annual convention a couple years ago. I'd never seen the actual production model, but they got me a couple, one of which was donated a year ago to the National Cryptologic Museum, which is the museum at the National Security Agency. So it turns out it was very important to their mission, and kind of gave me a certain amount of historical status.
Well, it must feel really validating to see your work having such broad use and being used in such, a critical way across, different organizations within our defense systems.
Absolutely. And InfoSec came out of the military, and it was back then all about national defense. So, I had people coming up telling me, literally it saved lives because they were able to use that wheel. So yeah, it is a special tool.
That's really exciting. Well, I feel honored to be talking to you, knowing that you've had that type of impact on the industry. Now, you mentioned 40 plus years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I've noticed, at least over my tenure, which is not quite as long as yours, but I see that a lot of things keep repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
So often we're dealing with things that maybe look and feel like new problems, but they're really the same old problems, maybe rebranded to sound more modern, or maybe rebranded because they're solving a more modern problem. But the concepts themselves at the basic level are still the same. A big part of that I see is, there's still a lot of challenges around how to manage risk and how to manage different security challenges within the industry that has still not gone away. It's been around for a really long time and it's still a challenge today.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any new things you're seeing towards like cybersecurity strategy that you think are very promising that will help us deal with some of the legacy challenges that still exist? And also, any thoughts on why some of these challenges are so hard to eradicate across the board?
I have a few thoughts on it. And I would reframe what you're describing as the fundamental problems of security, what you're trying to solve with this thing we call security. 40 years ago, it was primarily keeping secrets. And in those days, it was pretty simple. If you had hard copy secrets that you wanted to keep safe, you locked it in a safe. But most of what NSA did was protecting communications. We wanted to keep the secrets safe as we were, transmitting commands to troops on the battlefield, or in the game of espionage, recovering secrets and getting it securely back to the people that could use it to advance national security. The way I learned about InfoSec and risk was you're trying to protect something, you're trying to keep something safe. In national defense respects, it really had to do with human life, protecting the troops on the battlefield, our spies that are abroad, things like that. In the digital sense, in the modern age, and in the world we live in now, it's really protecting organizations' ability to do one of two things: make money and reducing their expenses, the cost of doing business. So what I've seen over the years is that, especially is what's advanced. The technology is advanced. As you said, the fundamental problems haven't changed. We've just made it harder to do with all the proliferation of technology, the proliferation of data, and we want it immediately at our fingertips. We all have the devices now, the source of truth, but we haven't done a great job of protecting it. And I boil it down to two fundamental problems. Most people in organizations think security is somebody else's problem, period. Or if you're an employee of an organization and you're using something, surely it must be secure. So what I see in terms of what's promising now is, even this week at RSA, I'm having conversations with vendors and people I know and people I'm meeting. There seems to be a shift in the conversation towards addressing some of those fundamental problems, which we've been talking about for the last 30 years. What I see different now is because of the latest thing that's going to end our lives, the AI, the machines taking over the world type of thing. I think people are sitting up and listening and trying to be a little bit more careful. There's also endless reports that get published about, the Verizon breach report, and other reports come out and they say, the way the bad guys are doing things are the same way that they're having success years and years and years ago. So definitely nothing's changed. I do a lot of conference speaking. I tell stories about how things were in the old days. Last year I was going around giving a talk based on my time after I left NSA and was out in the private sector, sort of at the beginning of this whole internet craze, which back then we weren't even sure if it wasn't just a fad. But I had a slide deck back then where we were going in talking to companies and basically saying, if you're going to plug into the internet and use that as a backbone, you really have to start thinking about data security and information security. I used that slide deck from 1998 in my presentation the last year. I probably did it a dozen times. Every audience I talked to, a lot of head nods like, yep, these are the same problems. These are the same problems. It's a little chilling. It's a little depressing because we, for 30 years, have been looking for that holy grail, that silver bullet, that piece of technology that's just going to solve all our problems so we don't have to think about it. Mm-hmm. But security at the very beginning, and this is what I try to explain to my customers as best as I can, is a process. You have to know what your goals are. You have to know what it is that's sensitive that you're trying to protect. And, in the old days, it was pretty simple. It was, research data or payroll data or how much we're charging to our different clients or, PII data, credit card data. These days, it's our movements, our thoughts, our voice. We've just introduced so many different forms of data. Yeah, everything. Not as simple as it used to be. The security problem is still the same. We want to protect that and only give it access to the people that we want to have access to it. But if I have a depressing moment, I think this is a losing battle. The optimism that I'm experiencing this week, and I'm not even sure why, but it just seems like people are starting to get past the, okay, technology isn't going to solve the problem for us. There is no amount of technology. We can't afford all the technology. We need to start approaching this problem a little bit differently, which requires, in my mind, just education and context about the fundamental issues of security, and then knowing that in your organization, make more informed decisions about what you're going to do in terms of investments in technologies, your people, your resources. And there's buzzwords that describe everything that I'm saying, but I try to always just boil it down to sort of basics that most people can understand, rather than throw out the latest buzzwords and fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that we used to call it, the FUD, to try to scare people into buying all the things. So they're sitting there with all the things and the blinky lights, and we've seen time and time again so many large organizations get breached and compromised, and everybody's like, wow, even they were compromised. And you start, to the degree that they're public about it, you generally find out that they're falling down because they haven't followed the basic fundamental things that are non-sexy, and you can't put a dollar sign on it and say, we bought this widget or this box or this, that, or the other solution. They're missing out on the fundamentals that should have been in place before or as you've implemented all that technology, which is necessary. We can't escape it these days, but we got to get over thinking that solves the problem so we don't have to think about it. At the end of the day, I try to get my customers, my clients, anybody that will listen, let's think about this. I'm not trying to change your mind. I just want you to think about it.
Yeah, a big thing, given how much you emphasize on the importance of data, mm-hmm. I think organizations are still struggling to get basic hygiene around data integrity, mm-hmm. data classification, data inventory. They still struggle to do all of that programmatically at scale throughout their business. And the challenge you have with things like AI today, where people want to train the AI models on their own data, if that's not done correctly, they're going back to the basics. You don't do the basic hygiene of your data hygiene itself in the correct way, no amount of new technology is going to help you get rid of that legacy technical debt that you have from not doing this correctly. So we're at RSA mm-hmm. And in San Francisco right now. It's hard to walk and take more than 2 steps without running into another AI-based solution, an AI vendor that's out there. From your conversation so far, I feel like you have some strong opinions on that piece. I'm curious what your opinions are on where we're headed with AI right now, and are there other areas maybe we should be focusing on beyond just looking at AI itself?
Well, yes, AI is the big buzzword here this year. It was the big buzzword here last year. But I think one of the things that I've seen as a shift this year is everybody's talking about it, everybody has it, but they've actually built something. For last year, it was just sort of the marketing slick. Oh, yeah, we've got AI. This year, there's a little bit more thought about it, but I think it's important to distinguish between the hype of AI as a buzzword and what AI actually is and is capable of and is doing. And I have a personal life goal as a grumpy old man to never touch AI as much as possible, which is harder and harder to do because it keeps getting shoved down our throats. But optimistically, I think AI is a huge opportunity to do the things that we can't do. All this data that's out there, yeah, the machines can sort it and find the things that we need that are important to us much more quickly than we can and more efficiently. And I guess I have this attitude that, over the generations, and this isn't just in our technology world, but throughout history, there have been innovations that have the potential for good and have the potential for evil. And back in the Cold War days, which is where I started all this, there was this concept of the cat and mouse game. The bad guy would create some new thing that was going to make them win the battle, and then over time, the other side would catch up and they would get it, and it was this constant sort of teeter-totter thing going on. I think that's somewhat true today. AI, like everything else, the potential for good, the potential for evil. It's just a matter of harnessing that. And the depressing part to me is that the more the technology advances, the more I think the gap between understanding how to use it for the good and protecting it gets further and further away of all the vulnerabilities that we're introducing and all the potentials for misuse, even without vulnerabilities, but just the potential for misuse. It just seems to get farther and farther apart. Keeps us all employed, though.
Job security is a good thing. I look forward to that every time I see new issues pop up, and especially new technologies pop up like AI, where okay, you know what, this is going to be something we're going to work towards for a long time.
So, but for me, I've tried for many years to just be very technology averse and not focus on that as much as most of us have heard the idiom of this whole thing is people, process, and technology, and far and away the emphasis has been on technology. The people context is usually the stupid humans, the stupid users. To me, though, after 40 years, I think the key element is the process. Just having the context in place to know what's going on. But ahead of that, and this is what I try to explain to my clients, is having a purpose. Why are you doing all this? It's not, well, we have to secure all the things and everything has to be just so, which is what drives the industry that creates this conference. It's understanding the data, the value of data, the lifespan of the data, what's more or less valuable, what do we need to protect at all costs versus what are the things that are meaningful and sensitive, but only for a day or only for a week. I guess that's another thing that I try to hammer home is this overall arching umbrella of security and everything is impenetrable is really not what we should be looking for. And it's, nobody can afford that. Not even, the four large companies that are pretty much nation states these days. They have a lot of money to throw at it, but even they can't do everything that can and should be done.
Yeah, when building and prioritizing things, whether it be security or anything, any other domain really, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. It's starting with the why, right? Ultimately, context is king before you do anything at all, making sure you have the right context properly understood, and then lead with the why you need to do something so you can come up with an acceptable happy medium, because you're never going to have something that's perfectly secure. That's almost impossible if you want any type of functionality or feature capabilities of the system. So
yeah, I went around a couple of years ago to conferences. I get hung up on words and the meaning of words. I boil down this thing to what I called the risk equation, which is what I learned many years ago. Risk being a function of vulnerabilities, threats, and what we called at the time countermeasures. Let's say that's security. I went around for years asking people to define these various terms because they're thrown around all the time to the point where a lot of these terms are sort of used as synonymous terms. And yet I learned them as elements of an equation, which means they're different. So one year I went around asking people, what is security? Floored people. People didn't have, I'm like, we're experts in this. Tell me a definition of it. The best definition I got from someone was, it's an emotion. It's a feeling. I like to say it's a verb. It's something you do. It's not a state that you achieve. Lately, I've been saying to try to get people to understand the difference. There's a difference between security, the things you do, the vigilance, the defense, the monitoring, the detection. There's a difference between that security and securing, which is what we're hung up on. Hardening, keeping up with the vulnerabilities, keeping up with the configurations. Those are two distinct functions, but I would almost argue that all that is not security. Security is what you do when you've done as much as you can over here.
If I give you a new version of that from my perspective, is I consider security of a system, especially if it's something you're building, to be one of the ilities, as I call it. So you have reusability, scalability, availability. Unfortunately, I don't have an easy way to make security an ility, but I feel like security is one of those ilities.
Go to a bar and slur your words, you'll come up with something.
So I see it as one of those ilities where it's just an inherent property of a successful system that is available, reliable, scalable, but is also secure.
I would agree and disagree, but it would depend on how you define system. Because I don't think it's strictly hardware or these days software. A system
is overall solution.
Is the operation. It's what you're doing as a business.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
I love talking to our guests about all the things they do outside of security and their day job. So you do a lot of things for Hack for Kids, and you've done that over the years. Can you share a little bit with us on what you've been doing there and why that was an area that you focused on?
Yeah, I got involved. I met the organizers of Hack for Kids some years ago, and they heard about my background. Hack for Kids is a nonprofit that tries to teach hacking skills to young people, usually adjacent to an existing hacker conference. So, hackers bring your kids. We'll expose them to lock picking, and we'll let them take old equipment and tear it apart to see what it looks like on the inside. There's math puzzles, there's crypto puzzles. Just trying to expose them to all the different things that happen at a grown-up hacker conference. I got involved with that. I was invited to speak one year and talk about cryptography and things like that. And right before COVID, they invited me to join the board. And we talked about what role, and the thing that I wanted to focus on was trying to expand the offering, which I believe in, to a more diverse set of people. And my focus is more on trying to provide Hacking for Kids types of conferences to underserved communities. These conferences tend to happen in cities, but the kids that come tend to be the kids of the people coming from the suburbs, not the people that are coming in that actually live in the cities, the underserved communities, people that are not necessarily the same color of me, that type of thing. So that's been my focus, and of course, I brought in right before COVID, and that kind of sidelined things for a while. But the overall plan, what I'm working on, is to try to produce what we're going to call Hack for Kids Urban, and try to produce a Hack for Kids conference. And I'm really trying to create a model that can be repeated in various cities. It needs to be organic. It needs to be homegrown from people that actually live in the city, and figure out a way to bring the young people that have just as much opportunity and ambition and creativity and possibility, but don't get the opportunities, give them the opportunity, and not just busing the kids from the suburbs, but really focus it there. It's in the works. We've got a prototype planned. I live near Baltimore. I live in Maryland. I've got contacts and friends now at the Department of Commerce in the state of Maryland. I'm friends with the newly appointed Secretary of Commerce in the state of Maryland, a gentleman named Harry Coker Jr. He happens to be the former National Cyber Director of the White House from the previous administration. And he's of the same mind, and he's in the right place that we're going to make this happen. So our goal is to build the model first in Baltimore and make it repeatable so that it can pop up in other cities throughout the country.
So I don't mean to get this song in your head, and if I do, I apologize ahead of time. But does Hack for Kids have a catchy tune like some of the other for kids organizations that I'm aware of?
Not that I know of, but we should work on it.
So when I talk to people who've been in the industry a really long time, one thing I know that has really shaped my career and where I am today is mentorship. Both being fortunate to have really strong mentors that have guided me throughout my journey. And also I've had the opportunity to really work with others to mentor them and also learn from them as part of their journey. I'm curious what type of a role mentorship played in your career.
Very interesting story, and I'll try to make it as quick as I can. When I was a kid, my family loved to do puzzles. When we would vacation at the beach in the summer, my dad would buy what was called the Dell Crossword Puzzle magazine. It had all sorts of different types of crossword puzzles, variations of it, crypto puzzles, crypto quizzes, which were basically Caesar cipher, simple substitutions. But these magazines also had logic problems, and we all loved to do the logic problems, my brothers, my dad, and I. But we weren't allowed to fill it out in the magazine because it would have a little table cheat sheet to help you do the logic problem. So we all had to take turns. Fast forward years later, I go to work at NSA. I'm in this office that's manual crypto systems. My mentor was a crypto analyst from the operations side of the house. And he was the one that talked me he interviewed me for the job, and he was there as a mentor, teaching me about cryptography and cryptanalysis. He also taught me how to play pinball. We would go on lunch breaks and play pinball machines. But one day at lunchtime, he was working on something, and I asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm writing logic problems. I, as a side job, write logic problems for Dell Crossword Puzzle magazine."
That's awesome.
And I'm like, wow, I'm in the right place.
That's a fun story, right? How small the world is and how things come full circle.
Absolutely.
So before I let you go, is there any advice you would give anyone that's trying to get into cybersecurity today?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And specifically, I get the question because one of the other things that I did at NSA was start learning how to do pen testing. So I get a lot of people asking, I want to get into being a pen tester or a red teamer. And or just in general, they want to get into cybersecurity. What I tell most of the people I talk to is find ways to expose yourself to as many aspects of this industry as possible, because there's a lot to this. Not everybody gets to be the pen tester, even though we hold that up as sort of the ultimate, goal or dream job. That or CISO, why I don't know. What I try to tell people as best as I can is expose yourself to as much as you can, just to try it, to dabble in it. Look for something that you like doing and have fun doing, as well as look for something that you seem to have an aptitude for, or you think you might be able to be good at. If you're lucky, it's the same thing, but at least go for one or the other. Because at the end of the day, having a job where you're doing something that's fun and challenging, for me, I see everything in terms of puzzles. But that to me is more ultimately satisfying, living life as a human rather than pursuing the dream of, the dollar signs.
Love it. I think that's great advice. And I think most of the people looking to get into cybersecurity will get value from that. It's not a job when you do what you love, right? That's the bottom line.
Exactly.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Really glad we could sit down and have this conversation. And hopefully we get to do it again really soon.
Hope so. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find more episodes on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at netspy.com/agent of influence. If you want to be a guest or want to recommend someone, then please reach out to us at podcast@netspy.com. And as always, stay proactive, my friends.